Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Becc Holland. I'm the head of sales development at Chorus.ai. Today, we are going to talk about a very special topic of 5 ways to turn your SDRs into AEs before they're asking you for a promotion. So it's a very special topic because a lot of times SDRs, they come into the SDR role, they want to make a transition, they want to crush it in their current role, but they're oftentimes looking to the next role and how they can get there. And so in the meantime, while they're in my program and during their tenure during that time, I want to secretly, behind the curtain as a manager, be turning them into an AE and who they are, so that whenever they do make that transition, they kill it for me as an account executive as well. So without further ado, let's start with number 1, KPI Systems. This is probably the topic that I'm the most passionate about, actually. So typically you have 3 kinds of reps within the industry for SDRs. You have what's called an inbound rep, where they're handling inbound only. You have an outbound rep, who's only calling on outbound leads. And then you have an all-bound rep, that is an SDR that calls on both inbound and outbound both. So typically what I've seen here for an inbound rep is they are measured on the amount of meetings that are set, sometimes influence ACV as well. The second, for an outbound rep, it's meeting set with maybe a spiff on, if someone's an ideal buyer or maybe they're a higher company, that's how they are measured and how they're comped. And then the third one is an all-bound rep. They're typically given a meeting quota or influence ACV quota, and then if marketing dips up or down, they're told to make up the balance on outbound. So those are the 3 KPI systems I typically see. And when it comes down to the genesis of, I would say, all of my passion and content is because I, as an SDR, whenever I came in, to the SDR ecosystem, I was given a meeting quota, and then I was told, okay, these are going to round robin regardless of quality, and that I had to hit a certain meeting quota. So regardless of the title in the room, whether it was a VP or it was a director or as a senior manager, I was given all the same credit. And so if it's easier to book a senior manager than it is a VP, if I'm smart as an SDR, if I'm given the same credit for both, I'm typically going to hunt here down near the senior manager, even though it's not nearly as valuable to my account executive team. So the first thing that you really need to crush before we even talk about any kind of messaging infrastructure or any kind of lead routing is, how am I comping and measuring my reps? What am I encouraging them to do? What am I defining as what great looks like within the comp system? So how I typically do this is, for an inbound rep, I measure on 50% of their comp on speed to lead. And then the other 50% of the KPI system is on a percentage system of, out of the leads that came through the funnel, what percentage are out of the leads that came through that are objectively qualified, what percentage did you end up getting into a meeting? So then if marketing fluctuates up or down, or MQLs fluctuate up or down, the rep is not penalized or overcomped because of that fluctuation of MQLs. So for an outbound or inbound rep, I do 50% speed to lead and 50%, on out of the leads that came through, what percentage did they get into a meeting out of the ones that were objectively qualified. For outbound reps, I do a point system. So the point system goes like this. I want to define for my SDRs, from an outbound perspective, what does good and great look like to my company? So when I'm thinking about what good and great looks like in terms of an appointment to an account executive, it typically reduces down to one of 2 things. Either it was a great title in the room or it was a great company. So I want to comp them and measure them accordingly. So think of a tic-tac-toe board. And how I do this is, the top X matrix is based on what does good look like in terms of a potential sale to my company. So the first bracket here, to Chorus, for instance, we charge based on sales seat. So the first bracket I do here is 0 to 50 sales reps. So my SDR goes to LinkedIn and looks at the company in terms of what would the potential sale be, how much could we potentially sell to this person based on the data, that firmographic data that I could see on LinkedIn. The second bracket for us would be mid-market is defined as 50 to 100 sales reps. And then the last bracket would be 100 plus to us is enterprise in terms of sales reps. So it's a way to encourage them to hunt the right types of companies without waiting for to see if it's a closed deal of like the influence ACV of the deal, because we can't accurately predict what the sale will look like in terms of the company before we're hunting it or having those conversations. So that's the x-axis. When it comes to the y-axis, I want to comp reps on the level of the title in the room. So we all know that all appointments aren't created equally. So typically, if you come in at the wrong level, it's much harder to work your way up the chain. But a decision maker takes more time to hunt for the SDR. So what I do for them is I do a 3-star buyer persona. So this for us is a VP of sales or a CRO, for instance. A 2-star buyer persona. Of maybe this is someone at the director level or senior manager level. And then a 1-star buyer persona of maybe this is an individual contributor in this instance. So I can hunt and set a meeting with an individual contributor, or maybe someone in sales operations. It's kind of a congruent buy, but not our direct ICP. But it's not going to be worth as much to me as an SDR. So you can fill in whatever values you want in here of maybe this is worth 1, 2, and 3 points, 2, 3, and 4 points, and 4, 5, and 6 points. So as an SDR, I start thinking like an account executive, because when I'm looking to hunt a prospect, I'm worried about what is the size of the company and what is the level of the title of the person in the room. So it gets me thinking about my pipeline before I turn into an actual account executive. So the third kind of rep is going to be an all-bound rep. So an all-bound rep, this is typically an SMB company that does this, is what I've seen. Prior to segmenting their team, they want to have their SDRs calling on all different types of leads. So they want to have them calling on the demo requests, they want to have them calling on the event leads, the ebook downloads, the webinar registrants, and cold outbound. So when it comes to all-bound reps, typically what I've seen in the industry is they're giving a meeting quota of, let's say, 10. And then if inbound, comes 2 or 3 meetings, let's say per month, or maybe even up to 4, 5, or 6, they book those meetings and they're given credit, because from an operational perspective, companies say like, we need 10 meetings out of these reps, so we're going to comp them accordingly. And regardless of what marketing does, if marketing fluctuates down, we're just going to have to ask them to outbound a little bit more. So the 2 goals of a KPI system, from my perspective, are to measure someone's efficacy and someone's work ethic. So in that case scenario, it doesn't measure either. So we can't control as an SDR the quality of an inbound. We can't control who inbounds, but we can control an outbound, an outbound person that we prospect into. So the all-bound KPI system, it's a tricky one, a tough one, is I typically set a 10 meeting quota. And then everyone that comes in from an inbound perspective is just worth a subtraction of 0.2 to the quota, with a low bar of 6. If they get to 6, that they can't get the quota any lower than that. But how they achieve their quota is by outbound meetings only. So even if I have 10 meetings that come in from the inbound perspective, I want to reward them for taking the time to make that transactional meeting happen. So if 10 meetings came in, they're worth 0.2 apiece, that'd be a subtraction of 2 points to my quota, and my quota would now be 8. But how I make meetings up against that quota is from an outbound perspective. So if I'm an SDR and I make up some of my quota off of inbound, then I have every encouragement to kind of sit a little bit prettier and not put all of my forces and gas onto outbound. So this ensures that even though they get credit to lower their quota for every single inbound meeting, they still have all of the gas to make up the quota difference on outbound quota, because 0 of 6 is 0% and 0 of 8 is also 0%. So that's KPI systems. That is the first one of I get my SDRs to start thinking like AEs, because they start thinking about the weighted potential of an appointment before they're going into AE. So it really influxes this mindset of thinking about their appointments in terms of pipeline and thinking about their appointments in terms of how lucrative they are to your business. So now we have KPI systems down. The second way that I turn my SDRs into AEs is by training them and teaching them and encouraging them to send out personalized messaging. Might be pretty controversial. Industry standard as of date is the majority of SDR teams are sending out mass blast templates. Best case scenario, they're sending out based on buyer persona, or they are drilling down to maybe the industry for someone and including relevant case studies. When I was an account executive, I sent very, very calculated messages to very direct prospects, talking all about the prospect and all about who they were and all of the wonderful things that they were doing that I thought made them a very valid buyer for me. So when I came into the SDR world, I was a little bit confused on why everyone was sending out these carpet bombs or spray and pray, if you will, and hoping to gather low-hanging fruit. So I started raising SDR teams. I fell in love with the sales development landscape, and I had a theory, and the theory went like this. I don't buy or I don't respond to unpersonalized messaging, and I don't think that my prospects are much different than me. So I decided to go to leadership that afternoon, and I went to them and I said, hey, I have an idea, and I want you to give me complete autonomy in this idea. And if the idea doesn't work, I want you to let me go because my instincts are wrong as a leader. I want to do something that I haven't seen been done within the sales development landscape. I want to pivot us from all mass blast templates to all personalized messaging, because if I'm sending something that's a mass blast template, it inherently makes me talk about myself as opposed to talk about my prospect. They gave me the authority and the chance to do that. On March 1st, we went live. On March 5th, we had doubled our numbers. On March 10th, we had tripled our numbers. And by March 15th, we had quadrupled our numbers with the same amount of people and the same exact people, because we are sending out personalized messaging. So in the terms of turning into an account executive, most account executives send out very highly tailored messaging, because if they do end up booking the meeting, they're responsible for building rapport with their buyer and for maintaining that relationship. But when it comes to SDRs, for some reason, I think it's an operational play. I think that we think more gas and more volume always turns into more meetings. And so we've kind of let quality slip by the wayside. So the second encouragement of how I turn my SDRs into AEs is I help them be conversational about my product. And the way that I have them do that is by turning them, encouraging them to send personalized messaging and basing every single thing that they talk about on the buyer instead of themselves or their product. The third way that I turn my SDRs into AEs is having them run webinars. Typically on an inbound line, when someone comes to your website, they have the option of clicking a demo request, and there are two types of people that come in on that line. There are qualified buyers that are objectively qualified that we want to sell to as a company, and then there are also the unqualified buyers that we still want to know our brand and we still want to know our product in case they ever can buy, but we don't want to take the time and really spend our calories there of having our account executives jump on with each one of them individually on a demo call. So if someone is unqualified, by industry standard or by our company standard, I still want them to like my brand. I still want them to know what my product does in case they ever are in a place where they can buy it. So I send those unqualified buyers. A lot in the industry I've seen, we just ignore them if they're unqualified, or we send them basically a message saying that, hey, this isn't a fit right now. Where I send them is a bi-weekly product webinar. And so this webinar, we can, instead of doing one-to-one, we do one-to-many, and who I have run that webinar is an SDR. So if you have an SDR who's looking to make a transition into account executive, an SDR that maybe is a little bit more senior, then the first skill set that they need is to learn how to demo the product and learn how to demo within the system that you sell. And so how I have them do that is I want them to practice essentially, not in a mock case scenario, but on real actual prospects that might actually buy. So in this bi-weekly product webinar, I basically route all the unqualified leads there. I have the SDR pitch it so they get practice on routing the demo, and then at the end of the demo I have them ask if anyone wants pricing or wants to buy the product, email me at this email, and it's a quick way to surface out of the unqualified pool buyers that can actually buy your product. The fourth step and way to turn your SDRs into AEs is by having them, drum roll please, listen to calls. So in the past, whenever an SDR comes into an organization, they want to get to know your product, or they want to get to know how account executives are pitching the product. And so they do what's called a shadowing. So they show up to a call that the account executive has with a prospect, and they listen into what's going on in that call so that they can learn from the account executive. But with wonderful tools like Chorus AI, you don't have to be your shadowing in the room. So I typically have my SDRs, I give them a quota of how many calls that they have to listen to per week, so that slowly along the way, maybe it's a year and a half, or up to 2 years that they're within the program, they get to know organically what the account executives are saying. There are 5 types of calls that I have them listen to. Number 1, I have them listen to the calls that they set. So they want to get to know if a meeting was qualified, if the meeting was unqualified, or what does good, great, and bad look like within a call in the back end for calls that they set. So it kind of improves their prospect or improves their prospecting along the way. Number 2 is going to be segmented calls. So for SMB, general business, mid-market, and enterprise, how do each one of these different calls differ? And what are the conversations looking like as an account executive for an enterprise AE versus an SMB AE? The third is stage calls. So what does a discovery call look like? A first vision call look like for some? What does a pricing call look like? What does a negotiation call look like? Number 4 is competitive calls. When my competitor is brought up, what are the different things that my account executives are saying? How are they competitively positioning throughout the call to close more deals? So my SDRs get to know how they can also competitively position. And then the last type of call that I have them listen to is what are called unicorn calls. Where was a technique item that account executive did something particularly well that we want our SDRs to listen into and learn how to mirror whenever they're demoing their prospects on the line. So the fourth way is that they listen to calls. And then the last way that I turn my SDRs into AEs is, you would have guessed it, is training. So I won't say much on this topic. I actually started with what I see companies do not so well and struggle with, down to what I see companies do well. Typically, if an SDR department isn't performing, then people want to take into a third-party trainer, have them train them on skills or how to work individual prospects on the line to close more meetings. So the only advice that I would give within the training sector is that if you're going to bring in a third-party outsourced trainer, then have them spend a lot of time training the trainers over training the reps. So typically you pitch some kind of theory, and all of the numbers, all of the ROI that can be sopped up from that is within the execution and within reinforcement training. So I won't say much on this topic of where you can go or who I prefer in the industry. But I will say that if you're going to bring in a third-party outsourced trainer, that they spend their time training the trainers so that those trainers or those managers can train the SDRs day to day, so they quickly get lethal over time. So in review, the 5 ways to turn your SDRs into AEs are: number 1, KPI systems; number 2, having them send out personalized messaging so that they learn how to nurture a relationship; number 3, have them run a senior SDR run the biweekly product webinars so they get a chance to pitch live your product to unqualified prospects; number 4, have them listen to all the calls for your account executives; and number 5, train them. Hope everyone enjoyed this, and hope you have a great rest of your day.